You know, with looking at all of these passages on Sabbath and on rest, it brought me back to a moment when I was an at-home mom for my preschoolers, specifically for Elise. She was my first 1-2-year-old child, and she did not like naps. I didn't know if anybody had one that would fight their naps, but she would get short-tempered. She would get whiny, she would be unable to process good decisions, and she would grump all across the house. And I'd follow her and go, okay, Elise, how about mommy rocks you? No! How about we take a nap? No! And she'd fight me and she'd turn from me, and we had these hardwood floors, and eventually she would have tired herself out so much that she would slip and usually knock her head on the hardwood floor. Just, not Mother of the Year, I hear you. But anyway, she'd fall down, and I'd sit there, I go, okay, well now you're going to sleep, and I'm going to be up the whole time going, do you have a concussion? Are your eyes dilated? Are you, spending the whole time wondering what's going to happen, because she fought rest. I knew she needed it. It was so obvious, and yet she didn't want what she needed most. Jesus said, come to me, and I will give you rest. He said, you will find rest for your souls. Doesn't rest sound good? He calls us to have what we need, to be refreshed in his arms. And the root of that, there's the fourth commandment. There's the Sabbath, where we are called to both not labor, not work, and called to keep it holy. So the Sabbath is, as Katie told us, it's the seventh day. It's 6 days the Lord created in Genesis 2. 6 days he created the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested. So God, when he rested, he did more than that. If you go back to the Genesis script, it says the seventh day he rested, and he made the day holy. He declared the Sabbath holy. So now he is not asking us to make the day holy. He did that already. He was not asking the Israelites when he first announced the Sabbath to make the day holy. He had already made it holy. He asked them to keep it holy. Well, when the Israelites first heard this declaration back when we were getting the commandments and hearing about it, they heard that they were supposed to take this day off for the Sabbath. In fact, they were being given manna every day, and on the sixth day, they were supposed to get double manna, so that on the seventh they weren't working, they were not collecting it. Now, the Israelites were not used to this. Having been slaves, straight out of Egypt, work, 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 work. There's no rest days. It was nothing but work days. So the idea that they would be having a day of rest to worship the Lord was so different for them. And it was such a blessing. Think of what a gift it would be if you never ever had seen nor heard of nor experienced a day of rest. However, the Israelites, some accepted this as their blessing, some accepted it like Elise accepted a nap. We're going to need to collect, we're going to need to work, we're going to need to. They weren't able to get out of their routine. Well, Jesus answered why we have the Sabbath. His disciples had gathered some wheat on the Sabbath day, and boy, the Pharisees, they were all over them. And so he said that the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. In Mark, he talks about that because, church, sometimes it would be easy to think that we are given a day to worship because God needs our worship. And it's not so. God actually needs nothing from us. Absolutely nothing. He desires our worship. He loves our presence. He wants to have a relationship with us, but he does not need our worship. He made the Sabbath because he knew we needed it. We need that day of rest. We need that day of worship. It's about caring for us like I was caring for my preschooler. I knew what she needed, whether she did or not. Many of you heard how we went on our vacation a few weeks ago. We did a 3-week vacation out west. And every day we were going long, long distances. We were driving hours and hours. Sometimes you'd drive hours and you'd see nothing but desert. It was some long pushes. It was beautiful, it was fun, but it was some long pushes through. When we finally got to the furthest point, we were in Southern California, and we had had a tough night camping the night before. We had stayed in a pretty rustic teepee. It's a whole different story, church, a whole different story. But we arrived, and we were in need of rest. And we made it to Southern California, and we stayed at my cousin's house. Church, this was a Sabbath. We arrived Saturday night and woke up Sunday morning, and we were able to be surrounded by our extended family, worship in a long row of the extended family at their church. Then afterward, we went over and we had this barbecue with all of the family members. Some I hadn't seen in years, some I had never met, my kids certainly hadn't met, and we were able to spend this time with them and laugh and talk and share life and talk about God and talk about kids and just wonderful things. And we left there, we went and hung out in the pool, and to be honest, church, I'm pretty sure my kids had ice cream for dinner that night. It was, Sarah says yes, frozen yogurt, frozen yogurt. Church, it was a Sabbath. We had pushed and pushed and pushed all these days before, all these days after, push, 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 and this one day of sitting in rest, worshiping, surrounded by family, and you know, it would look like we did nothing that day. We weren't productive. We were in no way productive. We made no miles on our trip. We produced no labor. We did nothing productive.
What's my favorite day?
Exactly, Sarah. She said it was her favorite day. My whole family said it is their favorite day. It wasn't everything we saw. It was the day of rest. It was the Sabbath with family. It was the time to worship the Lord. It was the best day of all. Church, we need a Sabbath. In America, we are busy. We have a workaholic culture. And, you know, church, it can lead you to self-worship. Look at how productive I am. Look at what I did. Look at what I was able to make happen. I did 15 hours of work in 10 hours. You know, church, God calls us to finish sometimes, or to put things aside sometimes. 6 days you shall labor, and on the seventh you shall rest. He calls us to stand public with our faith. When we take a seventh day, when we take a Sabbath, and we say this time belongs to God, we won't work. We know God will provide. He will provide what we need. He will provide the time. We know that His call to rest and His call to worship is more important than the call to be productive. And church is countercultural, but it's scriptural. You know, businesses used to close a lot. They used to believe on Sunday that there should be a Sabbath, or that we should, you know, we don't need to worry about financial provision. God will come through. We will worship. We will have a Sabbath. We will have a rest day. And so will our employees. And that doesn't happen so much anymore. It's kind of odd now. There are less and less businesses. I don't remember this so much in my lifetime. My husband talks about certainly having to fill up the gas tank at Saturday. There's no gas on Sunday. If we're going to Grandma's for dinner, we better fill up the night before. But now there is less and less rest. No rest is causing medical concerns, and in fact, mental concerns, and stress is actually creating less productivity. You think that you're working more and doing more and producing more, but you're not getting the rest, so you're not. So God knew. Much like I knew with my preschooler that she needed to nap, God knew. He called His people for a Sabbath because He knew we needed to rest and we needed to worship. The Sabbath is for us, and it's to bless us. In fact, like all of God's rules, they're intended to give you what you need, whether you know it or not. It's not that you have to, it's that you get to. It's a blessing. Now, looking back at And the Egyptians and the Hebrews, way back when Moses is trying to get the people out of Egypt, the first request was, he went to Pharaoh and said, God says, let my people go, that they may worship me. The slaves had no time to worship. If you're working absolutely every day, you had no time to worship. And so he said, tell Pharaoh, let my people go, that they may worship me. The slaves needed freedom to be able to worship. Lack of time is actually bondage, and it hinders worship. You know, back then with the slaves in Egypt, because they had never seen a Sabbath or a rest, and they worked, they were on a different time cycle. The Egyptians actually had 10-day weeks. So that kind of makes sense. You have 10 fingers, you have 10 toes, you have 10-day weeks. We count by tens, it makes sense. Where did this 7-day thing come in? So they had a 10-day week. 3 of them equals a month, still about the same lunar cycle that we have. So God said to the Hebrews when they're out in the desert, he said, okay, you are going to have a 7-day week. You're going to work for 6 days, you're going to have 1 day of rest. I created in 6 days and I took 1 day of rest. So now you're going to have this new rhythm of life. God wanted them to have time to worship. And so he went in and actually changed their concept of time. He changed their week. And he told them, this is the rhythm of how it is going to work. He trained them with the manna. If you go out on the 7th day and the manna is rotten, you didn't collect it the day before. He trained them. He taught them to observe a Sabbath. Time on earth, he knew, was precious because it ultimately belonged to God. He knows how long you will have on this earth. In church, Sabbath is more than just the absence of labor. Keeping the Sabbath acknowledges that the day is holy because of God's word and because of his example. He rested on the 7th day. Worshiping God by imitating his actions and resting as he did is a way to follow him. As a believer, we are followers who want to imitate God's action and imitate his character. Preparing for a Sabbath day encourages you to think about what God wants you to do. What do you need to do to keep the day holy? What does that look like in your world? And it takes time to be holy. That's why you're given a Sabbath. That's why the Egyptians were told you're going to have, or the Hebrews were told you're going to have a 7th day of rest. It takes time to worship. Worship is not a quick event. It's a time sitting in the presence of the Lord. So he gave us that time. He gave them that time. The Sabbath gives you the time to worship that it takes for becoming more holy. In a modern American lifestyle, we're so busy that it hinders holiness. Like the Israelite slaves, we must have freedom to worship. So church, I ask you to plan your week to finish on time so that you have time to put something down, to walk away from the laundry pile, to walk away from the half-finished job, and to sit in the presence of the Lord because we need it, church. We need it. We need the rest. We need the reflection. We need the time to be holy. And church, I call you to respond to God when he gives you the offer to be renewed and refreshed through a Sabbath. Take the blessing that he gives you of the Sabbath, and church, use it to the glory of the kingdom of God. In his name.